Day next Sunday. The sermon I'm going to present is called, What Will You Do with Jesus? Have you ever thought about that? I'm sure you have, but have you really just thought about it? What will you do with Jesus? And so be thinking about that in anticipation of what in the world is Randy going to present on that topic. What will you do with Jesus? And we're going to go into a new year, 2024, the good Lord willing. He has blessed us with almost the end of a year here in 2023, and we're looking forward to 2024. So be thinking about that as we will meet next Lord's Day on December the 31st. Okay, Esther. So chapter 2, we see what's going on here in the presentation of these women to be presented to King Ahasuerus. And you know, the more you read about King Ahasuerus, I don't know how to describe him. I mean, the words in the lesson and the words in some of the commentaries, let's just put it this way, he was not a very good man. He was probably the vilest of men in what he wanted and what his desires were and what he expected. And he puts it on full display. And so we can think about things and say, well, how or why would God use these circumstances with such an evil person involved in this? Why would he allow Esther to be put in front of this man when God surely knew, right? He knows everything, what this man was all about. Evidently, his reputation was far and wide as to what type of a person he was and what his mindset was toward women and the conquests that he exploited and that he put out there. And we see that as we go through this lesson. A little bit on the introduction, and we're going to kind of go back and then read from the lesson text, the scripture from Esther chapter 2, verses 12 through 23, as we kind of get to each section. But on the introduction page, on page 29, the author of the book says it is easier to see the providence of God in hindsight than in the current moment. And I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. And we see that on the pages of scripture and in this lesson here about Esther. For example, we recognize Joseph being sold into slavery was part of God's larger plan to form and develop the descendants of Israel into a nation. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers, right? Man, he was thrown into a pit. They lied to his father. Showed him a bloody coat that his father had given him, right? The coat of many colors. Had blood on it. They had killed an animal and spread that blood on him and said it was Joseph's blood, that he had been murdered and killed. So they lied about that. Joseph was sold into slavery and ends up in Egypt, right? And we know the rest of the story. I mean, he was in a bad situation. He was in a troubled atmosphere being in Egypt. But what happened? What happened to him? Did he give up and did he say, woe is me, I can't do anything for God, I cannot be the person I wanted to be or thought I was going to be? What a dishonor to my family I am because now I'm a slave in this foreign country. What can I do? Well, what did he do? He rose within the ranks of power. He gained favor in the sight of Pharaoh, and he put him in charge of a lot of things that anybody else probably would never have even been given a second look. Do you think God was involved in that? Surely he was. And then when his brothers come before him, when their fathers died and we know there's famine in the land and they're needing help and they come up there and they're scared. All those brothers big and bad when they threw him in a pit, sold him to slavery, thought they'd never see him again. They hated him. Now they're scared to death of him, right? And what was Joseph's message to them? What did he say? He said what?
It's all right.
It's all right.
And eventually he said to them, you meant it for, I'm paraphrasing,
Mm-hmm.
you meant it for ill, but God meant it for good.
Yeah. What did they think? They thought that Joseph would have them killed. Because now here their brother that they had done all this to, this evil to, was now in a position of power, and he could have had them killed. He could have told those in his care and under his directorship within the Egyptian government there, he could have said, hey, these guys, I know they're my kinfolk, but I want them killed because they did me evil. They were afraid that was going to happen. But what did he say? Basically, he said, I'm not God. You did evil toward me, but God used it for good. And as we go through Esther, this study of Esther, I think that just jumps out at us, doesn't it? So God can use us in difficult situations, in bad situations, where we think that we're just, the old saying is, when we're knee-deep in alligators, we forget that our first mission was to drain the swamp. We get so caught up sometimes in these ills and the bad things and that we perceive are just, I can't do anything. God is punishing me. I can't do anything. What can I do for God? I'm in this situation. What can I do? And we see that Joseph turned that around with God's help and used it for good. And we see what happens on down the line. Think about Moses. What happened with Moses? First of all, Moses didn't want to, I can relate to Moses, all right, at the burning bush. What did Moses say? When God told him, I want you to go to Egypt and free my people, right? And I'm paraphrasing now. And what did Moses say? What? Yeah. Well, Jason, I can't speak in front of these people. I can't speak in front of Pharaoh. And God had an answer, didn't he? Well, guess what? I'm going to send Aaron with you, and he's going to help you. Moses finally understands he's going, and then to lead those people out. But what do we know about Moses' life? He was born, right? And then he was what? Hidden in a basket in the river, right? And who finds him? Oh my goodness, right? Pharaoh's daughter. The panic that must have set in on Moses' sister when Moses was discovered, because she was in charge of hiding him, right? But now he's found out, and now we don't know. She doesn't know what's going to happen to him, right? But you know, women, you have intuitions, right? A woman's intuition. And I think she probably sensed that Pharaoh's daughter was a kind and caring person that would take care of this baby and cause it no harm. But, so he goes and he gets raised up, reared up in an Egyptian family. Not just any family, in the direct family of Pharaoh, right? And he elevates into positions of power. He is well thought of and well liked by the Egyptian hierarchy there. We might say he had it made. But then he makes a decision. Now, he's in a situation that we would say for an Israelite may not have been the best thing. He's in captivity. He's still really captive even though he's being raised. He's not with his family. He's not with his people. And his people are suffering hardship. God used him for good, didn't he? We know the rest of the story. Moses went on and then he came back and he stood before Pharaoh, right? And he made demands from God. And we know how all that turns out. And we know about the plagues, and then we know how the people, the children of Israel, were led out. Moses led them out of captivity. this baby, who was quasi-adopted by an Egyptian princess, is now leading his people out of captivity. God used him. He was in a difficult situation. He really could have just stayed there and had the lap of luxury for the rest of his life. God used him, right? So, who are we? Who are we to sit down and say, I can't do anything. I can't do anything for God. I can't do anything for my Lord and Savior. I'm just in this situation. You don't understand. I'm in this situation. Whatever it is, I can't do it. I can't do it. God uses us sometimes in the most difficult of times that we think we can't do anything about it, and yet if we just look and do and follow His will and obey Him, good things will happen. We still may live through difficult times. We still may not improve our lot in life as far as how we're living or where we're living or what, but we can be that example and we can reach others. How powerful. How powerful. So, we can see the God's handiwork in the lives of these men and also now in what's happening with Esther. So we know that the preparation was for how long? First of all, these women, these virgins were rounded up and brought into the palace for the purpose of Ahasuerus picking a new queen, right? And they were supposed to be in preparation for how long? Hey, McKenna. A year, right? 6 months doing what? Oil and myrrh. And 6 months doing what? Yeah. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to get me in trouble, but because I'm standing up here, you can't jump out of your seat and attack me, ladies. I thought some ladies take a long time to get ready. But a year? I've now changed my whole attitude about this. 20, 30 minutes, men, don't mean nothing, does it? A year? Now, there were a lot of women, evidently. And they were doing this, he was doing this at the suggestion of his people that he relied on. I'm talking about King Ahasuerus, people who he relied on for his support and information. I'm not thinking of the right word, but counsel, thank you, counsel. And he said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's bring all these women in here. And then, but what was the thing he was going to have done? This was part of the deal. They were going to have to go in. After they had been through this year, then they would start going in and spend one night with him. Now, I've already told you about the reputation of this man. You can read it. They have to go in and spend one night. They go in the evening and they leave back in the morning. And not only that, they're in one location under Haggai, his oversight. When they go into the king and spend the night and they come back out the next morning and then they go to another location. Right? And the text calls them concubines. And we know what that is from our studies of the Old Testament, what a concubine is, right? And so they won't be called back unless the king finds favor with them. Now, the text doesn't say what happens during that night. We can only imagine based on the reputation of the king. But Esther, when she gets brought in to this palace for part of that group that was going to go through the preparation and all, she gains favor with Haggai. Now, the Bible talks about, and this is in what Chad covered, I believe, last week, part of what he covered in the first part of chapter 2, but she found favor. The Bible states that she was, for again, I'm paraphrasing here, but that she was good looking. She had good form and good face.
She wouldn't have been in there, right?
Right,
She wouldn't have been selected in the first place. She had to been beautiful.
right. But evidently, she had other things about her too that also exuded in her appearance, but also within her in the way she probably dealt with people, she talked, and she carried herself. And so all this catches the favor of Haggai. So much so that he puts her in a special area and gives her her allowance. They called it her allowance, which was the cosmetics, I think, and the things that they were to use and all that, and gives her 7 handmaidens. I think it's 7 handmaidens. So she's treated a little bit differently right from the get-go. You think that was God's providence? She didn't being treated like all these other women. Okay? So, the script was, you can take anything you want to when it's your time to go into the king. You've already gone through this process. You've gotten all this, the perfumes and the myrrh and the oils. You've already had all that, but you can take anything else. Haggai will get it for you. He'll give it to you. You can take it in there. But Esther says she relies on what Haggai is going to give her. She doesn't request anything different. Sounds like a little bit of humbleness, maybe.
And also, she realized that this eunuch who's in charge of you, the king.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that aspect, what would please the king.
Ladies, if your husband or your boyfriend likes the color blue, wear blue. That's what basically she was saying. Haggai said, hey, like Jim said, he knew the king. And so she goes in there, and again, we don't know any details about what happens during that night, but when she comes out, we find out that the king, Ahasuerus, is just smitten over her, right? He is really enthralled with Esther. So much so that he makes her the queen. Now, I don't know how many women had already been through and were waiting still to go through, because the indication is that maybe Esther might have gotten moved up into a more prominent place to be called in earlier than what maybe she would have been remaining in the main area. So he chooses her as queen. And then he decides he's going to have a big party. Now, what was the last time he had a party, what happened? And get this now, this is in the 7th year of his reign. 7th year, and she's called in, the night that is her night is in the 10th month of his 7th year. So it's almost to the end of the 7th year, if they counted 12 months in the year like we do, but we'll say that. So it's been a long time. I don't know how many women had been going through, but the first time he had a party, he had a queen already, didn't he? Her name was Vashti. What happened?
And by the way, that was in the 3rd year.
In the 3rd year? Okay.
So there's 4 years
Yeah.
in there, which apparently is accounted for by Grecian War.
Right. Which didn't turn out well for him, did it?
Not at all well.
So what happened on this first party that we read about? I think it's is it chapter 1 maybe, I believe? Right. Started it in motion, didn't it? Why though? What caused it to go into motion? I know we've already sort of touched on that and studied it, but let's just touch on it just a minute. Why did it start everything in motion? She told him no. Because he was going to parade her around. And the indication is it was just a drunken revelry And she said no. Well, here we go again, aren't we? Maybe. He's called for a party. He's called for a celebration. He's even called a holiday for Queen Esther. He's named her queen. He's put the crown on her head. But it's a little bit different in it. Evidently, it isn't the same type of drunken brawl, for lack of a better word. Evidently, it's not the same situation. We don't get that indication. But he sets this day because he wants everybody to know, number one, that he has a new queen. Number two, he wants to show her to the people and celebrate because she was evidently special. So much so that he, I think, took a little bit more respectful approach in what he did. We see where he assembled everybody and he got everybody, all the people, he evidently gave gifts out to the king. What if we did this in the United States? We got an election coming up here, next year or so? What about if we have a new president and a new first lady, what if they just decide to give everybody, all of us, a gift? Would you like that? No. Because there's always a string attached usually, right? Yeah. Well, that's all we're going to get is our money back in the form of something, right? So Queen Esther. Now, a little bit about Esther, as we've already studied, is she kept something secret. And even through this time here, she kept this secret. Mordecai, and we've reviewed this before, Mordecai was who? Her what?
Her cousin and surrogate father.
Yes. Her cousin and surrogate father. Why was he her surrogate father? What caused him to have to raise? Yeah. Her mom and dad had died, and so he was, I don't know if he was the closest kin or he was the next of kin in that line, but her father was his uncle. So they're first cousins. And there must have been somewhat of an age gap there. I don't know how many years, but she is raised by him. He treats her like his very own daughter, and she listens to his counsel. She obeys him just as she would have her own father. Isn't that interesting? I think times have changed a little bit maybe, but it's very interesting how that dynamic worked. Because they're basically cousins, right? But he stepped to the plate. So she keeps something secret. He tells her, do not reveal something. That you're a Jew. Why though? Now, where are we? King Ahasuerus he's over the what empire? Persian. And probably and most likely, and there was not a very good look upon. Is that a word, Mona? Mona always smiles at me and kind of laughs when I say something that she's like, I think I understand what he means, but boy, is he butchering the English language. So he was, she was a Jew, but Mordecai didn't want her to let that be known because there was some not favorable response to Jews from the Persians, right? In fact, there's one in particular, and we'll study more about him later on, and maybe into chapter 3 or further, maybe all the way into chapter 6, a man named Haman, who really doesn't like the Jews, right? So Mordecai says, don't let that be known. Isn't it interesting that you couldn't just evidently just tell right away if you didn't already know that they were Jews. So the Persians, and I don't know if that means that, that there's just not as much of a distinction in features, in skin tones or whatever, but no one questioned her. And she's elevated to a position that all eyes would be on her in the kingdom. So She keeps that secret. So she's elevated to this position, which makes that so unique. Here is a Jew who gets to be queen of a Persian empire. Interesting. Again, I think very much so this is God's handiwork involved in all this. So we understand that he has this presentation for her, and things seem to be okay. The king's happy now. He's pleased with his choice. And Mordecai is staying close by because he's concerned. Through this whole process, he was making sure that she was okay. Now, Mordecai, and I think it's in the book, the text of the book, they talk about him being in a position, some position within the kingdom. And by the position, yeah, that's right. They take that to mean that he had some position, but him being seated inside the gate of the palace there allowed him to be able to come in contact with a lot of different things and hear a lot of different things, right? Now, back in these days in the kingdom, some of these kingdoms, and we can read this even through the Old Testament, the history about some of these kingdoms and all that interact with the Israelite people. There was always a threat of being overthrown. There was always a threat of assassination. We can read some of that during the reign of David, can't we? People didn't always like you. But when they really didn't like you, they took you out or tried to. So Mordecai is sitting inside the gate and he hears some things. 2 eunuchs are talking. And evidently they're not real happy with their boss. And so they want him out of the way. Mordecai hears it. And so what does he do? He tells Esther. Esther's now the queen. He tells her the plan that he's overheard, and he says to her to tell the king. She tells the king. Now, there's an investigation. They look into it and determine it to be true. And what happens to those 2 fellers? They get hanged. They are killed for their insurrection, for their attempt and thoughts about planning an assassination or removal of King Ahasuerus. But something interesting happens with Mordecai. Is he made head of all the armies of Persia, or is he made the assistant king in command, or is it, what happens to him that's kind of interesting? Doesn't get any reward, but what? Right then he doesn't, but what happens? In the book of Chronicles now. That's not the Chronicles of the Bible, but that is a book that records history basically, right? And so it's noted. So people can go to that. If they look at it, if they read it, they'll know about it, that he did this. So again, why didn't God just allow these 2 eunuchs to carry out their plan? And I mean, we've already determined King Ahasuerus was he was a no good, low down scoundrel of a king, right? Why didn't God just allow that to happen?
Well, if that had happened, then Esther presumably wouldn't have had influence on his son, who presumably would have taken over his influence.
Right.
So he had to stay alive, right, for her to have it.
Do you ever wonder and think about the people that God has used throughout the ages, who, if we were given the choice, we probably would have been like those eunuchs. I mean, the book goes so far as to say he probably deserved to die, King Ahasuerus, for what he had done and what he was known for. you know, again, going back to us being in difficult situations sometimes or feeling like, what can I do? How can I serve? I'm in this situation. God can use us. But, you know, He's not going to pull a string. He's not going to go over there to Chuck and say, come on, go, go, go. He's going to have us understand, as we understand His Word, understand what our purpose is, understand what we're supposed to be doing in this life. It's up to us. It's up to us. But God will use situations. He did here. And we're going to go through the book of Esther and see even more and more as this story unfolds about Queen Esther. But just think out on all the times, all the things we've studied. We talked about Joseph. We talked about Moses. I mean, there's countless times. We went through a study in the teenage class on Wednesday nights through the Old Testament, the journey of the children of Israel through the wilderness. And how many times they would mess up. And God would use that situation, and it was a lot of times it was punishment. A lot of times it was very harsh punishment. But there was always a lesson. The remnant, the people that were left that understood, that were trying to follow Him and obey Him, and they would come back together. Sometimes they were put in captivity. They were allowed to be taken. So let's think about a circumstance that we may or may not be in, that we may or may not have been in, that what can we do? And look, as I'm speaking this, I'm speaking right to Randy Wright. What can I do for the glory of God to be the example and to come through this and find something good in what I'm in to make a difference? Do you know how powerful it is when someone who's diagnosed with a terminal illness, I'm thinking of one lady, precious soul, that I grew up knowing, who had every right to be angry and to be just, I can't do anything, in a hospital bed inside of her house with a phone sitting beside her. And she would call. If she heard you were sick, she would call and check on you. This lady couldn't get out of a bed. I know some of you know who I'm talking about. I was a recipient of one of those calls. I was calling to check on her, and all she wanted to do was see how I was doing. Can we be that kind of a blessing? Have you known other people like that? No matter what they're going through? What could Esther have said when she got into that situation? She could have blamed God. She could have blamed Mordecai. She could have been angry at the world. She could have just said, and just given up, even if she had been made queen and not been the person she turned out to be, that she remained. She could have just been that person that we want to not be, right? And so we're going to go through difficult times. Some of us have already been through it. Some of us are going through it. Some of us are going to deal with it in days or years to come. And how are we going to react? Are we going to be like Esther and rise to the occasion and let God use us in a way? Are we praying that I want to be used? I want to find opportunities. You know, we pray at times about our elders and that the works they put before us here at Shades Mountain that we were going to be eager to be involved in. Are we? Well, I'm going to be like Mel now. Well, my back isn't feeling real good right now.
You can get ready for Sunday.
Now, he doesn't say that, but, you know, I mean, I'm just saying I like that way when he changes into his voice like that. I've known him for years. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, she was in she knew what could happen. She knew she was in a difficult situation. So the rest of the story. We're in chapter 4. We got 13, 9 more lessons, 8 more lessons. The rest of the story. That was our first bell. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting dynamic, almost teamwork with Mordecai and Esther.
Mm-hmm.
In that he got some very valuable intel. And he probably at some point had access to the data, but instead he passed it on to Esther. And then she told the king the investigation validated all of that, and he probably thought Esther was just even more awesome than that.
Yeah,
But what did she do? She let it be known that the intel came from Mordecai.
right.
So he eventually got recorded, got credit. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. And going back to what I was touching on earlier, Mordecai could have just kept his mouth shut, couldn't he? Do you think Mordecai was real favorable in his impressions of the king? No. No. There's a plan, and we know what it is because we have the fully revealed Word of God. We know what the plan is, don't we? We just have to follow it. We just have to follow it to the end, whatever that end is. If it's the end of our life, if it's the end of time on this earth, we must be about following that plan. And what is that plan? Well, next week, what will you do with Jesus? Hopefully we'll be able to understand a little bit more and reinforce what we already know about what the plan is and how we're supposed to be a part of it and how we are supposed to act about it. Any other questions or comments?
You commented well initially about the providence of God and so on. And, we have some brethren who seem not to believe in the providence of God, that God has just quit that kind of thing in our time and doesn't work in our lives. But, to me, that's a shame that anyone would feel that way. But I think if we really are paying attention, we can see, and as you said, it's in retrospect,
Right.
that God has worked in our life. And also, we have to be open, and this is implicit in some comments you've made. We have to be open to possibilities. If a door opens, we don't know for sure, but that's God maybe opening a door for me.
Right.
For me to do something, specific.
Exactly.
That maybe that nobody else could do because of my relationship with somebody or
Mhm.
who knows what,
Yeah.
But it's, and it may not be, as you've often said, it may not be something that's really fun or pleasant, right,
Right.
to do.
I think that's where we have to come to grips with our own selfish desires. And I say selfish, we're all selfish, right, to some degree. I mean, I want to live an easy life. I don't want to have knee pain, back pain, head pain. Some of us don't want children pain. None of us, we all like to have that cushy ride, right? There is a song, a book, I don't know if the book came first or the song came first, and I can't even tell you, y'all, some of you older folk, you know what I'm fixing to say, right? Now I forgot what I was going to say. I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. There was a book written. Who sang the song? Lynn Anderson. Thank you. And a movie? Oh, I didn't know that. Is it on Hallmark Channel? Is it on Hallmark Channel? No. That's why I haven't seen it.